Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will be sharing my time with the member from Fort McMurray Cold Lake today. Mr. Speaker, I am honoured to rise in the House and add the voice of the people of Barrie, Springwater, Ormonte to today's debate. I want to take a moment to go over the unfortunate state of this country's finances after 9 years of deficit budgets and how the Liberal government's inflationary policies are affecting families in my community. Under this Liberal government, mortgage payments have doubled, down payments have doubled, rents have doubled, the cost of gas, groceries and home heating have skyrocketed, and people cannot afford to eat, heat or house themselves. This Prime Minister said repeatedly that doubling the national debt would have zero consequences and the budget would balance itself. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister did not have the foresight to realize that doubling the national debt would drive up interest rates to historic modern highs. And now the government will spend over $54 billion in interest on the national debt. That is more than the government is spending on provincial health care transfers. The Parliamentary Budget Officer in his latest report stated that Budget 2024 marks the third consecutive fiscal plan in which the government's new measures, even after accounting for revenue raising and spending reviews, have exceeded the incremental fiscal room resulting from economic and fiscal developments. Conservatives had three simple demands leading up to this year's budget. We committed that if the Liberal government introduced measures to immediately pass Bill C-234 in its original form, require cities to permit 15% more home building each year as a condition for receiving federal infrastructure money, and cap spending with a dollar-for-dollar rule to bring down interest rates and inflation, we would give our support to their budget. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister and his Finance Minister ignored our pleas for a balanced budget, lower taxes and more homes for Canadians, and decided to add more than $60 billion in new spending that will keep inflation interest rates higher than Canadians can afford. That means higher taxes, higher inflation, higher interest rates, higher rents, and higher mortgage payments. I would like to spend some time discussing three central issues that I hear often from members of my community: the high cost of housing, the carbon tax, and public safety. First, one of the top concerns for residents in my community is housing affordability. In my riding, the cost of housing has skyrocketed under this Liberal government. Residents in my riding are now forced to spend almost $2,000 a month on a one-bedroom apartment. The only solution to this crisis is for the Liberals to build more homes. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister told Canadians directly that housing is not a federal responsibility, and bureaucrats in his own housing department had confirmed that this government has no plans to bring down housing costs by building the homes that Canadians need. According to Statistics Canada, between January 1st and November 30th of 2023, Canada built 17,000 fewer homes than in the previous year. Instead of taking real action to address this issue, the Liberal government is concerned with photo ops and ribbon cuttings. The numbers do not lie. This government has failed an entire generation of Canadians who fear that they will never be able to own a home. I see the crisis surrounding interest rates playing out in my community. I receive calls and emails constantly from residents whose mortgage rates have doubled. Recently, a retiree in my riding saw their mortgage jump from $1,100 a month to $2,600 in less than a year. It hasn't always been like this in Canada. 9 years ago, the average down payment on a home was approximately $20,000. Now the massive cost of even a modest home in my community is forcing residents to save for longer and longer. It now takes 25 years to save up for the cost of a down payment, and the needed down payment for a home has doubled. Roughly 64% of the average pre-tax monthly income is needed to pay the monthly costs associated with housing. This crisis has made the dream of home ownership impossible for all but the wealthiest few. In fact, 76% of Canadians who do not own homes believe they never will. The Liberal government had 9 years to address this issue. The housing crisis is a policy and leadership failure from this Liberal government. I will go on to an issue that is directly affecting families and farmers in my community: the carbon tax. Just a few weeks ago, this Prime Minister hiked his punishing carbon tax by 23% as part of his plan to quadruple the carbon tax over the next 6 years. The Parliamentary Budget Officer told members of this House that Canadians would be better off without this carbon tax, saying that they would experience higher income growth while the price of food would come down. But the Liberal government went ahead with their tax anyway. To illustrate the impact this tax is having on the lives of Canadians, I want to share some of the correspondence I've received from people living in my community. I have a bill here from a family of 6 in my riding who are paying $142 a month plus HST and carbon tax on their home heating bill. I have another Enbridge bill from a Barrie resident where the carbon tax makes up 33% of their total bill when you factor in the HST. This resident bought a programmable thermostat that automatically turns down the temperature in her home down to 15 degrees from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. She believes she's doing all she can to lower her gas bill, but still feels punished by this costly carbon tax. I hear this government boast often about the rural top-up of the carbon rebate. Meanwhile, we know that the calculations they made on who qualifies as rural Canadians are deeply flawed. Residents in my riding who live in rural places like Anton Mills, Elmville, Hillsdale, Midhurst, Minising, Phelpston, and Snow Valley are deemed to be living in urban areas, according to this Liberal government's rural top-up formula. Budget 2024 finally says that the government will look to better define rural areas, but it only commits to put forward a proposal to do so later in the year. This is unacceptable for residents in my riding who are forced to pay more in carbon tax, and proof of why we simply need to axe the tax for everyone forever. I'll move on to how this tax is affecting the hardworking farmers in my riding. I am proud to represent a riding with a large, vibrant agricultural industry. I was recently sent an Edinburgh bill for almost $10,000 from a farmer in my riding who runs a poultry operation. Their bill shows a carbon tax charge of $2,700 on their cost of fuel to dry grain corn. Shockingly, the carbon tax is more than the value of the gas before delivery and global adjustment. This Prime Minister just doesn't understand that if you tax the farmer who grows the food and the trucker who ships the food, you end up taxing the food the family buys. Finally, I'll spend some time discussing the crime and chaos this Prime Minister has unleashed that is deeply affecting members of my community. Small businesses bring life and a sense of community to our downtowns and neighbourhoods, yet they are sounding the alarm bell about the impacts of crime on their livelihoods. These businesses, including in my community, face significant challenges related to vandalism, theft, loitering, and public intoxication. In my riding, a beloved Italian restaurant named Limoncello Bistro was recently broken into for the 6th time. Thieves who recently broke into Limoncello stole everything from their restaurant, even their meat and seafood. These repeated break-ins have cost the owners thousands and thousands of dollars. The owners of Limoncello Bistro have stated that, quote, "I find it hard to swallow that I have to pick up and leave a place where 5 short years ago this wasn't as bad as it is today. We fell in love with downtown Barrie, the waterfront, the community, and the people. We as business owners shouldn't have to leave because criminals are putting us out of business." End of quote. I agree. Small businesses like Limoncello are on the front lines of the Canadian public safety crisis, and we urgently need to address this issue of skyrocketing crime rates. We know that the Liberal government caused this problem with their soft on crime laws C5 and C75. Another issue that is directly affecting a small business in my community is the Liberal government's nonsensical attack on law-abiding hunters, farmers, and sport shooters. This budget proposes to spend $30.4 million on a hunting rifle buyback plan that does not exist. This is on top of the $42 million they've already committed. Think about that. The Liberal government will now spend $72.4 million to buy exactly 0 guns from owners and businesses. Not one gun has been bought back after spending $72.4 million. I just recently received an email from a small business in my riding. He is a responsible business owner who gives back to the community and is facing devastating financial losses because of this failed policy. He is now struggling to pay for his everyday expenses. He has over 40 firearms worth over $50,000 sitting in safes that can't be sold, but must be insured and housed in a secure rental space while the Liberal government forces him to pay GST on them. The owner of this business says that this government is clearly bent on just winning political points and not caring about the safety of the general public surrounding firearms and criminals who use them. I agree with him. While the Prime Minister wants to protect turkeys from hunters, common-sense Conservatives want to protect Canadians from criminals. The only way to reverse the damage the Liberal government has caused is by reversing the course and doing the opposite. Canadians want change. They want lower taxes, lower mortgage rates, lower grocery bills, safer communities, and most of all, they want to change the government. The Conservative promise is simple: no gimmicks, no half measures. We will axe the tax, build more homes, fix the budget, stop the crime, and bring home affordability for all Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I'll be voting alongside my Conservative colleagues against this budget, and we'll be having a no confidence in this costly NDP Liberal coalition.
Questions and comments. Councillor Kamal-Tarr, the honourable member for St. John Rothsay.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank my colleague opposite for his speech on the budget. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about housing, and I want to talk about the lack of support the party opposite, the Conservative Party, has actually had with respect to housing. I mean, we came forth with the National Housing Strategy. We came forth with, a rapid housing initiative, federal co-investment fund, the Housing Accelerator Fund, and many I think, wonderful transformational programs for cities and communities across this country that would help build housing. I think we also all know that the issue and the challenges and the emergency we face with housing has been unfolding over many, many years. But, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party voted against every one of those initiatives. So my question to the party opposite is this. How can you vote against those wonderful initiatives and still say you support housing? Thank you.
The honourable member for Barrie, Springwater, or Medante.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite for his question. As I mentioned in my speech, 9 years ago, Canada was not like this. You could live a dream where I remember myself buying my first home, freshly married, and it was a goal to be able to do that. That is long gone. The Liberal government NDPs have been in power now for 9 years. This huge issue has been created over the past 9 years. Well, member opposite says 9 more to go. Hopefully he means months or days, because that's enough. But we do need to get back to having an election, bring the Conservatives back in, and we'll bring this once again a dream where young people, especially teenagers, can afford to buy a home.
Okay, Kamal Tara, the honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
And thank you to my colleague who I have respect for in my day-to-day. I would like to ask the member if he could please share the narrative that I'm hearing from the Conservatives throughout this debate is around the concerns of the impacts on private interests of us moving forward with seeing a national health care plan, with seeing national pharmacare, with seeing dental care, and any loss that may occur for private interests. And I'm wondering if the member could share why that might be and why we're not seeing instead an emphasis on people who need access to insulin, who need access to birth control, who need access to dental care. Thank you.
For Barrie, Springwater, or Medante.
Thank you to that question. Hopefully I heard it all. We are a long way down from each other right now. What the Conservatives and myself are afraid of is more bureaucracy. I think it's been proven over the last 9 years that this Liberal NDP government has been building bureaucracy after bureaucracy, which is costing more and more money. That is our biggest fear, that we don't believe more bureaucracy is going to solve a lot of issues. People are struggling. We need tangible, good results, and we don't think just building more government bureaucracy is going to build tangible results for Canadians.
In comments, the honourable member for Kootenay, Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you, thank you for the speech. I just wonder if you've had people coming to your constituency office saying how much better it is than it was 9 years ago, or 7 or 6 or 5 or 4. I can honestly say I have had not one person come to my office to say how glad they are that things are working out. Just wondering in your speech if you can relate to what's been in your area. Thank you.
Just mean to remind folks to run through the chair, not to say you directly to the honourable members. The honourable member is Barrie, Springwater, or Medante.
Thank you to my honourable colleague for that question. And yes, it's quite frankly heartbreaking, some of the calls and emails I'm getting. I recently sat in my office and returned a bunch of calls, and by the end of that, quite frankly, it was very daunting and very stressful. I heard negativity from every single person I spoke to. I mentioned earlier, and I'll mention them again if it's okay, Speaker, that 2 specific people that I spoke to on the phone really stuck in my mind. One was a senior lady who has a disabled child who has literally cut out lunchtime of her own meal to try and feed her disabled son. She's going on 2 meals a day now. And another lady was in tears because she had not been able to pay the last couple months of her mortgage payment, and a great fear. The bank had been working with her for a couple months, but she felt that was going to be ending. She was going to lose her home. She'd worked her whole life, worked hard as a Canadian, bought this home, was enjoying her home. Just because the interest rates and the price of inflation in Canada, she has fear that she was going to lose her home, was in tears. It was a very tough call to hear, and that's the type of calls I'm getting in my office.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member for Barrie, Springwater, or Medante. I get those kinds of calls in my office as well. We reach out and try to provide connections for people who are falling between the cracks with other charitable agencies and help. But we as a party believe that we need to go to where the wealth is. We're surprised and disappointed that the Minister of Finance hasn't done that. Corporate assets in this country have more than doubled in recent years, from, believe it or not, from 14 trillion in assets to 28 trillion in assets, and yet corporate tax rates remain among the lowest in the world. I'm wondering if the Conservative Party believes that we should, for instance, bring in a guaranteed livable income, which would actually end poverty in Canada, ensure that every Canadian can meet their basic needs while not having clawbacks, able to earn money and become successful taxpayers within the nation of Canada.
We are out of time. I allow the honourable member for Barrie Springwater Ormadonti to quickly answer.
Very quickly, it's great to hear the member opposite mention that she helps people as they come in, and that's my biggest goal. In here is one aspect of our job, but helping residents is really our best goal, our best part of this job. And every time someone does come into our office, we try and point them in the right place to get assistance to. And I can tell the speaker is telling me we're out of time, so we'll carry that on later, that conversation.